see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Okay. Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and today I'm here with Vinciane Rycroft to talk about how we can build a culture of empathy and compassion together. So thank you very much, Vinciane, for joining me today for this dialogue.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure because you're a real organizer in Europe, I guess in England and in France. You have a website called Empathy and Compassion in Society, or it's it's compassionInSociety.org, and then the title is Empathy and Compassion in Society, and I have it up on the screen here, so just take a quick peek. So, yeah, tell me about yourself and kind of this website and conference you're putting on.
Sure. Basically, I'm an educator. I'm an educator in sustainable development, which means I'm interested in anything to do with how do you communicate to the public and to young people ideas on how we live together on this planet. So how do we cohabit harmoniously without depleting the resources, taking care of each other, and in a way that's not going to put under pressure future generations. So that's my background. I've got a training in education for sustainable development, and that's what's led me to create this project called Mind with Heart, which is a project for young people and educators on altruism, compassion, and empathy. And so, as a group of educators, we've decided to put together this conference that you've just mentioned, Empathy and Compassion in Society. That's just one of our projects.
And what are some of the other projects?
There is a few. We've got 4 main areas of activities. So one is to develop challenging education materials for young people, especially teenagers. We've got a special interest for teenagers 13 to 18, partly because they're a wonderful age group, but also because we feel there is quite a lack of good education projects for them on the issues we're talking about. There is excellent anti-bullying schemes. They're really the main projects out there at the moment. And there's one or two others that you might know. The Happiness Project is one of them. Peace Jam is another. Actually, all of those are based in the US. In Europe, we feel there is a little bit of a lack of good education projects for teenagers.
Well, you're kind of the...
So that's...
Sorry. What was that? That's...
No, go on.
Yeah, you're like are you kind of like the real organizer behind these projects? It's because you're really doing a lot. I mean, this is quite amazing, all the work you're doing.
Well, no, there's a little group of us. If you look on the Mind with Heart website, the website for our actual charity, 4 of us started Mind with Heart. There's one teacher in Australia, one teacher who was at the time in Zealand, he founded Mind with Heart, who is now back in Europe, and one in the UK, and I'm myself based between France and the UK.
Okay. Well, I just had a little notice here that the kind of short on bandwidth, so I'm going to cut out my video so you won't see my video, but I'll still see you, and I think that'll improve the connection a little bit.
Sure.
So, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
So yes, there is I mean, the idea of Mind with Heart is that we're a network of educators, and to empower each of us to really take action in our schools and to bring the education materials that we're putting together in the schools we work with. So creating these materials is one of our main projects. Then the other one is, as I've just mentioned, for each of us to be holding sessions and workshops in our schools. And the third one is the training of educators, because actually from our own experience we can see how important it is for educators to cultivate self-compassion, empathy and compassion. And from, just to take the time off to actually reflect on this topic. Sometimes we're just a little bit swept away by, everything we have to do, the topic we have to teach, the different pressures. And so basically our approach is to create a space where educators feel they can take time off, reflect on their initial motivation for becoming educators, because actually when you talk to educators, they all have this really strong motivation to contribute to a more positive, happy, altruistic society. So it's really coming back to their original motivation and looking at the ways in which they can cultivate empathy and also self-compassion in their professional life. And from there, be a leading example for young people. So that's another project. And then the fourth one you mentioned, it's we think it's really important to communicate around compassion, around altruism and compassion, because there is still a lot of misunderstanding about what these values are, and there's also a big misunderstanding about the fact that you can cultivate compassion. Many people, for many people, that's actually quite an interesting, possibly new idea.
Yeah, some people think that compassion or empathy is just an inborn trait that, and they don't realize that you can actually do something to foster it.
That's right. That's a little bit, an old idea. It's a little bit ingrained. Actually, when you start opening it up with people, they don't really think that, but it's like it's like something in the background that actually has quite a lot of influence on the decisions they make and the way they perceive themselves and the way they perceive others. And as a result, their actions.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was the conference then. You're really doing this, the Empathy and Compassion Society conference, and have the website up here. And you have some of the really top academics and scientists coming to that. Like Mary Gordon from Roots of Empathy, the C-Care, the folks from C-Care, James Dottie, and quite a few. Is Karen Armstrong as well? Is she coming to that?
Yes.
So that's a great lineup.
So Tanya Singer is coming from Germany. She's this wonderful speaker, neuroscientist, specialized in empathy. Others that you haven't mentioned, we have, so basically there's 3 topics in this conference. We're giving the broad view of the scientific perspective and the ethical and political perspective on the role of compassion in society. Then we're going to give a taste to people of what do we mean by cultivating empathy and compassion. So we have one speaker who's Paul Gilbert, is a very important UK-based speaker in this conference, who's developed this compassion-based therapy. And he he's very much focused on self-compassion. And he also has a strong interest in compassionate leadership and how we create conditions in our modern societies for compassion and empathy. And then Patrick Gaffney, who is a meditation teacher, will be, who is the president of the Tenzin Gyatso Institute. That's the Tibetan name of the Dalai Lama. He will be giving a taste to people of the practices that can help you or support you cultivate compassion. They're mindfulness-based practices, and they're practices that have been tested in many scientific experiments. We have on our website a few links to those. I mean, I'm sure you've already been documenting Richard Davidson, the work of Paul Ekman as well, who's has been really instrumental in making all this research happen. So basically, science now shows, and especially neuroscience, but not only, that you can create positive habits of empathy and compassion. And that these mindfulness-based techniques do this actually very easily. It's been shown that after just 2 weeks of doing these very simple reflections, you actually open up in a pro-social way to the people around you.
Yeah, so I see on the conference it says you have 3 topics, areas. So it's compassion, empathy, scientific definitions, misunderstandings, and function. Compassion, the benefits at the personal level, and compassion and action and social cohesion. And then that's kind of the 3 areas that are being addressed. And then you have a second component, a youth gathering.
That's right.
And what is that?
Yeah, so one really important aspect of the conference is to really show examples of people who've been using these methods actually for years. You know, sometimes not actually advertising it too much. In the field of healthcare, in the field of education, and social care. And as you mentioned, and this is really or part of the event that's really important for Mind with Heart, is we're taking the opportunity of these wonderful speakers gathering in London to allow a group of secondary school students, we have 300 secondary school students, to interact with them. So that's, you know, as I said earlier, we're really interested in finding new ways to challenge teenagers in reflecting about empathy and compassion. And so if you have the chance to talk to this amazing neuroscientist about how the brain works and how empathy works, it might completely transform how you view other human beings and yourself and your relationship to them. Or for example, this amazing researcher called Jotam Heinberg from CCARE, he's been doing a lot of work directly himself with peacemakers in gangs, and he will be interacting with young people as well. I mean, there's many others I don't want to. So you're bringing
together some of the top experts in empathy and compassion with young people, and they can kind of just mix and get to know each other and talk with each other and share ideas and questions.
Yes, we'd like really young people to have a chance to discover these different viewpoints that they don't necessarily have access to usually, and then also bring back, what they've discovered to their schools and communities.
Well, one of the questions I ask is about, it's kind of looking at the definition of empathy and compassion, and I like to actually do it a little bit with metaphor, because empathy is, here at least in the United States, is defined with the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes. And I was wondering if you have a metaphor for empathy, like what is empathy like for you? Well, you can't use those common ones, you got to come up with your own.
Well, actually, the common one that we usually use is, as you said, looking through someone else's eyes. But actually, the way we introduce empathy is with young people is even more simple in a way than that. Is with much younger children and even teenagers in their early teens. We invite them to observe someone biting into a slice of lemon. And then we talk about what happened as they were making this observation. Could they actually feel what the person was feeling? And so we usually simply describe it as this ability to feel what the other person feels. Compassion has got an additional element of courage, the courage to act based on this feeling.
So the compassion, you're kind of looking at the action component then, kind of. The other thing with compassion, it seems to be, for me, I see this kind of come up all the time in terms of people asking, what's the difference between empathy and compassion? And I always say that compassion is empathy applied to suffering. I mean, it is one step. Like, I mean, I can empathize with you now. I can see you're looking in the air with your eyes, and my mirror neurons are mirroring that, and I can see you kind of thinking. It's like, oh, I don't know, I'm thinking about that. So that's kind of like empathy and, mirror neurons at work. And then if I saw you suffering, and then how I interact with your suffering, with empathy, that's kind of how I've kind of defined compassion. And then compassion seems to also kind of have a component of compassionate action, taking action to alleviate the suffering.
Exactly.
So is that sort of how you're seeing it?
Yes, you're completely right. It's both those elements. And that's what's really interesting in exploring compassion with young people, is that a really important element of this investigation is defining what is happiness and what is suffering. Because what is happiness for one person will be suffering for another. Or could be suffering for another. Mm-hmm. So there's actually a lot to explore there. It's a very rich topic.
So you like to bring it up and have the students just explore it and talk about it and think about it and.
Yes, well, we have two approaches. One is investigative and debate. So we have a series of philosophical questions, usually using opposites to really lead the investigation. So, for example, are human beings by nature compassionate, or are they selfish? Is compassionate good for me, or is it good for others, etc.? There's a whole range of them. So we have this investigative approach. And we also have a more personal self-reflection, contemplative approach that's mindfulness-based. So we actually introduce mindfulness as well to young people as a basis to be able to develop their awareness of their own thoughts and emotions, and their own understanding of happiness and suffering, and therefore of the happiness and suffering of others.
So the one part is kind of self-awareness, mindfulness of what's going on inside of them, inside ourselves, and then the other part is sort of more of an exploration of you're saying looking at opposites and kind of thinking about it and kind of debating and kind of an inquiry kind of an approach.
Exactly. Investigating, we call it investigating, not taking anything for granted, undoing our preconceptions and our usual habitual ways of looking at ourselves and others.
Well, with the metaphor, I wasn't quite sure what your metaphor was for empathy. If it was empathy is like seeing someone eat a lemon or something and feeling it, or what was the metaphor there? I mean, if we I can say from myself, the metaphor is empathy is like a cornucopia, in the sense that it's as I empathy for every person, if with kind of this self-empathy and mindfulness, we have all these feelings which are like a cornucopia, and each person is like that, and then we kind of share this cornucopia of experiences. So as I'm here with you in dialogue, I'm getting to experience kind of all your whole cornucopia of thoughts and feelings and experiences, and empathy kind of opens up the door, for that through this cornucopia of exchange. And for me, the opposite of empathy would be like a desert. It's like a desert, the Sahara, where it's just hot, dry, nothing but sand, no trees, you're totally thirsty, just kind of pain and suffering, kind of, no cornucopia. So that's kind of how I'd create, from an imaginative point of view. So do you have any kind of thoughts about that? Like, what would be your metaphor of empathy and the opposite of empathy?
I guess what comes to mind, I mean, I guess I don't particularly function with this kind of images, but what comes to mind is empathy is a society where actually people feel free to be and be with each other. Because there's this ability to know that the other is just like oneself, and that creates a huge amount of trust and mutual trust, and so it's really that sense of being that becomes possible through empathy. And then the lack of empathy would be basically more what, a very frantic human environment where people are insecure and always looking for something, that they should be doing. So, I mean, visually, I would visualize empathy and the lack of empathy in those ways.
Okay, so empathy is like the society where people are just trusting and caring for each other, and then the opposite of empathy is maybe like downtown London, we're in the business section where everybody's frantically. I'm just kind of extrapolating here, but. No, you're not.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of empathy there too. I think there's lots of empathy in many unexpected places.
So, but anyway, so it's frantic, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I guess for me it's just that that sense of authenticity and allowing oneself just to be. So it's not, empathy doesn't always have to be, very caring and very. But there is this kind of simplicity in the trust that others are just like you, and mutual respect.
Mm-hmm. So how do we go about building that culture like that, where people trust each other and they respect each other and they have that sense of caring and mindfulness and.
Well, I think what we're all trying to do, which is understand better how each other function and the nature of what a human being is certainly very helpful. I mean, what we've chosen to do, our small group of educators in Mind with Heart, is to just give some space to young people and educators to reflect about what they think about empathy and how to create a culture of empathy. And actually, just by creating some space for it, we think it naturally fosters empathy.
Mm-hmm. So it seems to be kind of two parts. One is kind of like an inquiry approach, and the other is just really creating kind of a mindful space, just like meditation does. It creates you slowing down, being able to be aware of what's going on inside yourself, and just by creating that mindfulness, that empathy kind of naturally occurs. Or
exactly.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like you.
That's one approach. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what that.
And it's a very important one.
Yeah. Well, I have kind of in terms of definitions of empathy, I've kind of looked at like what all the way the academics have, how the academics have kind of defined it and kind of put it together. That there's kind of like 4 parts to empathy, and I just wonder if I could just lay those out to you and just kind of get your feedback on that. And the first part is kind of self-empathy, which is kind of what you're talking about, the mindfulness, self-awareness, sensory awareness of what's going on in our bodies. And then the second part is mirrored empathy, which is sometimes called emotional or affective, emotional contagion, which is kind of through mirror neurons. As we're watching each other, unfortunately you can't see me because I turned the video off, but I can see you. So I can see, how your body is moving, the tone of your voice, and that mirrors itself through mirror neurons within me. And the more mindful, the more open, the calmer I am, the more I'm able to take that in, who you are, and to feel who you are. And then the third part is sometimes called perspective taking or cognitive empathy. And I like to use the word imaginative empathy because we kind of take the perspective, kind of more of an imagined perspective of others. And then the fourth part is empathic action, which is as we kind of connect at those different levels, that we start seeing the other person and how our actions affect them, and that when we want to work together, we kind of take their feelings and thoughts and what's important to them into kind of consideration and work together in sort of a more harmonious, creative way. And I've seen that kind of play out, especially in mediation, where people are, I don't know if you've done like restorative justice type mediation, where, parties are kind of really fighting each other. They're mad. They're just not connecting. They go through this whole process, and they go through the, connecting to themselves, connecting to others, taking the other perspective, and then they start negotiating how they're going to act, what they're going to do in the future. And that's kind of the empathic action component that I see. So that's kind of like the framework that I've been using, and I'm just wondering how that kind of resonates with how you're kind of looking at empathy.
Sure. I mean, that's what you're saying has been developed by different scientists. I mean, there's different frameworks, and people tend to use slight variations, but it makes complete sense. I mean, what we feel is what we explore with young people is how compassion is this. I mean, we lead them to uncover this for themselves. Yes, it's not. It's never a lecture, but how compassion is a combination of empathy. So this ability to feel and imagine that you've described, and also reason or discernment is actually a better word. So discernment is really key here, especially when it comes to for young people, but for all of us, to finding the right balance in how to take care of others, but also of ourselves.
Yeah.
So this discernment element is really key, and actually we find that even in the training for teachers, it's really the key that that unlocks some of the problems they're having, because teachers can get very burnt out from caring, too much, having too many people to care for.
Yeah.
So this discernment is the ability to look at what is going to lead to well-being and what is going to lead to further suffering, and to make choices. So that's a really important aspect.
So you're wanting to bring
passion.
into the discernment, which is a little bit like holding everyone's humanity kind of equal, and it means holding your own humanity as valid too. Like in the United States, in the 50s, it was, for women, it was you're supposed to sacrifice yourself for the family, right? And your needs and everything weren't supposed to matter, and this was, which doesn't really work. And in other, in societies in general, it's like this self-sacrifice. You don't bring up your feelings and needs and what's important to you. And our common humanity is holding everyone equal in that sense. And you're kind of you're kind of saying everyone, including yourself, has to be heard in the dialogue, in the relationship, and that discernment is maybe a little bit of boundaries, or how do we draw? I mean, that's a whole nother aspect of empathy and compassion. Is like what is the relationship of boundaries in this too? So it's a little bit along those lines. It sounds like you're saying.
Yes, and I mean this comes from all of our work comes from the understanding of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and psychology. So it's completely secular, but it really comes from the understanding that has been developed over centuries of how the human mind functions, and how you do cultivate positive or negative habits. And also this understanding of empathy plus discernment being actually the definition, if you like, of compassion is really important, and it's now backed up by several scientists who in fact show, as you were mentioning, it just comes to my mind because of what you said earlier, show with age how we develop both these faculties. I mean, or we have the emotional contagion to begin with as babies. We have that straight away, but actually the element that develops most with time is actually the discernment. But of course that needs to be developed. If you're just, that's why the investigation and the mindfulness are really important, because if you don't develop that ability to observe in a non-judgmental way, then you can become very stuck in just the emotional contagion and this feeling what others are feeling and imagining what others are feeling and so on. Without this ability to take care and to act.
Yeah, I've heard that there's when I talk to so many people about empathy, and one of the things I hear is people who have said, well, when I was growing up, I didn't have a sense of myself and be able to create that discernment. and so they spend a lot of time, trying to learn how to create that discernment, because they kind of got lost in the emotional contagion part of empathy, and they kind of didn't develop that sense of who am I, and who is my feelings, and they kind of feel kind of vulnerable within society. So that discernment seems to be a real important part of empathy, so that you have a sense of self and can open that sense of self as you feel, you can discern what's safe and kind of a valid way of kind of having that openness.
Yes, and that's why the mindfulness is so important, because you can see that if you are talking about all this self-sacrifice, for example, if with the mindfulness you will notice yourself going certain ways, going into self-sacrifice or excess or suppressing yourself, which are all different types of judgment of yourself, and if you do it for yourself, it's quite likely you're going to do it for others, actually, so that's not particularly helpful. So the mindfulness is really an important basis to be able to develop empathy and compassion.
Yeah, so the mindfulness really sets you, you're by yourself, and you're just being able to feel who you are and really getting connection to your feelings, and that are kind of your feelings, and kind of having a sense of awareness of who you are. And
yes, I mean, it's a whole process. It's basically a process of getting to know your own mind. I mean, that's what the Tibetan master Sogyal Rinpoche, that's how he defines meditation is a process of getting to know your own mind. And for that, you actually need to tame your mind. So with the mindfulness process, you're bringing your mind back again and again, and learning to get to that space where you are able to just simply observe what's going on.
And
so there's actually, there's many techniques.
Yeah. There's that technique. There's also techniques of dialoguing within the mind. For example, that different parts of the mind create a dialogue between each other. That's what I think I like about the metaphors, because I create these metaphors, like you were saying, the society of caring, trusting people, and the society of frantic, society. And then how do you create a dialogue between the two, right? It's like, what does the society, the frantic society, say to the trusting society? And there's kind of like this whole dialogue can kind of happen between the two. And it kind of leads to like a third state of being as they kind of dialogue all the way through. So that's like another kind of technique or approach. And which,
okay.
So... I kind of go on and on about the the definition, because I think it's really important, because it's so confusing what empathy and compassion is. And I just heard a speech by a woman here. She's kind of a very conservative spokesperson in the United States, Phyllis Schafferly. And she actually was very critical of empathy in the schools. And she kind of went through, said, we don't need empathy in the schools. And one of her criticisms for it was saying it's unscientific. There's no definition of it. So one person says empathy is this, one person says empathy is that. And we can't have this confusion in the schools. We need clear, strict, structures. And this is, we need these fixed rules. And so anyway, I think it's really important to kind of work at kind of getting a clearer definition of empathy, and because people like that, they have a right to know what we're talking about, I think. I mean,
of course, and that's exactly the point of the work you're doing, and also the conference we'll be doing in London, and all these amazing scientists who are working on this topic at the moment. And in fact, I think we're really getting to the point now where there is agreement in the scientific community, mostly on the definitions of empathy and compassion. And, I mean, we've already talked about them. But you're right. It's important, and actually, it's something the Dalai Lama always says, is that it's really important for scientists to study these positive human qualities and not to always focus on the negative ones. There's so many people working on what is depression and what is overeating and all these endless classifications of everything that is wrong with us. Actually, we need as much energy put into the positive qualities and to understand them better. That's part of the process of understanding what a human being is.
Yeah, that I've heard of people who study depression and then they get very depressed, for example, just by being involved in it. So maybe it's a good idea if we kind of study empathy and compassion, because maybe we'll get even, more, feel more happy. And
well, that was definitely my personal motivation for getting involved in this. I thought maybe that could be a way to become more compassionate myself by spending all my time thinking about and communicating and discussing it with young people and with others.
Has it worked that way?
I don't know yet, and it's probably not for me to tell either. But anyway, it's definitely much more joyful than if I spent all my time looking at what's wrong, with young people or with their teachers. Or it's definitely an approach that I personally enjoy.
Well, how did you come to see the power of empathy and compassion? Was there some kind of a moment? Was it a big aha, inspiration moment, or was it kind of a more slower, gradual process for seeing the importance of empathy and compassion in life?
I mean, I think it's like all of us, we all have different moments where we observe and a yearning as well for more empathy for ourselves, self-empathy, but also from others for ourselves. So there's, of course, there could be many stories, but one, I mean, I've always been particularly inspired by figures like the Dalai Lama that I mentioned, or like Nelson Mandela, who really have this ability, as you were saying earlier, to just consider everyone just on an equal basis. And basically, I just find that state of mind, that way of viewing things, incredibly valuable and worth investigating and contemplating.
So that's kind of just seeing everyone's humanity.
Yes, and I felt that at school and then later in society, we were very much encouraged to, and it's very well-meaning, to explore our differences and respect our differences. And of course, that's incredibly important to see that actually people perceive reality in different ways, and that's why they act how they act, and that in itself develops our compassion. But the Dalai Lama also says it's very important and very effective to focus on our similarities, just like you were saying, on our common humanity. And I practice this myself, and also we do this with young people. And it is incredibly wise, you know, actually incredibly it works. That, you know, you just consider, oh, this person also has the experience of anger. No, the anger might not take the same shape. It might start off, you know, very quickly, whereas my anger could be, you know, more hidden and slow to arise and so on. But actually, at the end of the day, it's anger, for example. And so to really see the similarities between us and others really helps to break down the obstacles to empathy and compassion.
So it's kind of seeing that common humanity. So seeing maybe the loneliness, the fear, the anger, the you know, the suffering in others. Say, hey, that's just like mine too,
and all the positive things. Actually, that's an equally crucial aspect of compassion. Is actually the ability to rejoice. And that's really important because we forget that element. The ability to rejoice in what they have already, and to see, oh, this person, you know, loves doing what they're doing. Just like when I get involved in something I enjoy doing, I just love it, you know, or just really seeing the similarities in this non-judgmental way. You know, they might be loving something that I don't love, but that's not the point. They love it just like I love, you know, doing this.
Yeah, so
it really brings people together.
So it sounds like maybe one of the blocks to empathy and compassion is that judgment, and we kind of need to get past there and start seeing the experience and the feelings of others, and the full spectrum, the joy, the creativity, to the more painful emotions, but the whole spectrum then.
Of course. I mean, the problem is, you know, I remember at school or even in my upbringing, you know, I was taught to respect others and not to judge others. But actually, it's not that easy to do. And actually, my question was, but how? I mean, that's all very well, but how do you actually do that? And it's really what is so precious and valuable in this Buddhist psychology and philosophy, and this approach of mindfulness and these practices of compassion is just really is just so refined. It's a science of mind, and it tells you how. It leads you to discover for yourself how. And that's priceless, actually.
Yeah, so it's that.
Because I met also this humanitarian worker years ago. I mean, in my early 20s, who was working in South Africa, and so she was a very compassionate being. She was working with AIDS issues, so you know she'd gone through all of this process to be able to do this work, and she also came to the same conclusion. She'd been brought up with this idea that you have to respect others, not judge others, have compassion for others. But she also felt, but how? I mean, how do you do that? And she was very inspired by the secular message of the Dalai Lama on this, and the methods that he was proposing.
So to build a culture of empathy, one of the things we need to do is learn the nuts and bolts of how to do it, the real step-by-step, practical tools that can really make it, a reality.
Yes, it's not actually that difficult. It just takes a little bit of... Actually, as you say, it's just a culture. Because mindfulness in itself is really not difficult. And the compassion practices, they're very, very simple. But it really is a question of culture and seeing it as something important that you want to spend a little bit of time discovering for yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's when I talk about culture, for me it means raising the value of empathy and compassion within society. So it's kind of like it's already a value, but how do we make it kind of more explicit? How do we, like in the United States, like sometimes the president will give a speech, and he'll use the word, I think when George Bush once, he mentioned the word like freedom 25 times. So that's like the culture saying, hey, freedom is important, and it kind of sends that message throughout society. So I kind of feel like we need that kind of level of commitment within society, where, the president is up there at the State of the Union saying compassion, empathy, compassion, empathy. That would be amazing for them, for a president to say it, 20 times in a speech.
Sure, that's part of it.
Yeah,
definitely.
Raising it is that value level. Well, we've talked for about an hour. Is there about anything that you feel you'd like to cover that we haven't covered yet? Because I could talk for hours about this, and I really enjoy hearing all your insights, and because you're really a real pioneer on this, and a real empathy and compassion construction worker is my sense.
Well, I'm sure you know as well as me there's actually millions of them out there.
There is.
Because we can just look at your website. And yes. It's just it's just interesting to take part in this movement.
Well, I'm so grateful.
I don't really have anything to add.
Okay.
Just to say, for actually the conference we're organizing in London is actually organized by a partnership of organizations. You'll see on the website there's different organizations, including the Tenzin Gyatso Institute, the Charter for Compassion, Action for Happiness, the Compassionate Mind Foundation, the Spiritual Care Program, Foundation for Wisdom and Compassion. So actually, really, I guess what my point is it's actually really important to work together, and that's the beauty of the work of the Charter for Compassion. Actually, is really creating a movement for empathy and compassion, and it's obvious because that's a very, you can't be working on this topic and not do that.
Yeah.
But it's also good to that's why what you're doing is very wonderful, because it helps bring people together.
So to build a culture of empathy and compassion, one of the pieces is let's start networking everyone as much as possible and come together around this. Make those connections and partnerships.
Sure.
Great. Well, I'm so glad we've had a chance to chat here and share some ideas and connect and get to know each other. Let me put the video on, so maybe I'll come back.
I'm sure it's only a start.
Yeah. So, well, we had talked about doing some panel discussions as well, and kind of keep the dialogue going, and I look forward to doing more together and creating this empathic civilization and culture together.
I sent you an email earlier today, my time, which was the middle of the night for you, saying I've actually managed to fix a time with two other educators.
Oh, great.
Who also work with teenagers. One is in Canada and one is in Jordan. And they're both linked to the Charter for Compassion. So we thought it could be quite an interesting angle of exploring empathy and compassion with teenagers, and what does the Charter for Compassion bring to that. So that's our next step. if that's good for
that
you,
sounds
we've
great.
actually
Yeah, let's do it.
we've actually agreed on one of the dates we discussed before.
Oh, okay. I think it was in a week's time.
It's a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll check the email, and that's great.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. So it'll be 4 of us in a panel discussion. Sounds like okay, great. Then we have a next step, and we'll just keep these steps going. Just keep. For me, it's like construction workers. Building this new culture, and I'm so glad that you're out there. Working on this, and that we can kind of partner and connect and share this quest, together.
Mm. Yes, no, it's great. I mean, I'm sure. I know you're managing to connect lots of people together, which is amazing. I mean, it would be nice to be able to reach to people on different continents as well, but I guess that's tricky.
I interviewed.
But there must be.
Yeah,
there must be some.
Oh, I interviewed someone in Beijing, China. So.
Oh, great!
So
that's amazing.
And I'm sure we can get others. So yeah, we could look at a panel, with one person from each continent. It could even be someone from Antarctica. I'm sure the researchers there have Skype. So okay, well we have 2 ideas now to work on. So that could be something. Okay. Very good. Look forward to...
Probably breakfast time for you and dinner time for me.
Yeah. Okay. Great seeing you and talking with you.
Yeah. Take care, Edwin.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.